I thought my new neighborhood would be a fresh start, but it didn't take long for Karen, the HOA president, to make it a nightmare. My service dog Scout has been by my side for years, helping me manage my disability, but when Karen found out about him, she didn't just have a problem with it. She tried to take him away. She claimed he wasn't a real service dog and tried to get animal control involved, but what she didn't know was that I wasn't just going to let her walk all over me. This story isn't just about Karen's overreach. It's about how I turned the tables and exposed Karen's own illegal pet hoarding secret. Watch till the end because you won't believe the crazy twist that backfired on her. Don't be like Karen. Subscribe to the channel to show your support and to be notified when we release new videos about crazy Karens. It all started innocently enough. When I moved into the neighborhood with Scout, my service dog, I didn't think anything of it. I had my doctor's letter, all the legal documentation proving that he was fully certified as my service dog. He wasn't just a pet, he was my support system. But Karen, the HOA president, wasn't having it. At first, she was polite about it. She came over one afternoon with a friendly smile, or so I thought, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as the HOA president, making small talk about how wonderful the neighborhood was and how she was always looking out for the community. I nodded along, assuming she was just another neighbor. But then came the punch. "I noticed you have a dog," she said, her tone shifting from friendly to businesslike. "Unfortunately, our neighborhood has very strict rules about pets. We don't allow dogs unless they're registered with HOA." I could already feel the tension rising in my chest. "He's not just a dog," I explained, trying to stay calm. "Scout is my service dog. He's with me for medical reasons, and he's fully certified." Karen's expression didn't change. Instead, she just raised an eyebrow. "Service dog or not, he still has to be registered with us. HOA policy, you know. It's for the safety of the neighborhood." I took a deep breath, holding back my frustration. Actually, service dogs don't need to be registered with the HOA. I've been living with him for years, and I've never had an issue. Karen gave me a polite but dismissive smile. "We'll see about that. You'll need to fill out a form for approval. I'll be following up with you soon." She handed me a flyer about HOA policies and left without another word. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd heard rumors that Karen was a bit of a stickler for the rules, but I didn't expect her to target me like this. Scout was my service dog, he wasn't just a pet, and the law was on my side. I started looking into the HOA rules more carefully, and sure enough, there was nothing in the rules about requiring service dogs to be registered. That night, I sat down with Scout, reading through the laws and regulations. Service dogs are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. They don't need to be registered by the HOA, and any attempt to remove them is illegal. I knew I was in the right, but Karen didn't seem the type to back down without a fight. The next day, Karen came by again, this time with a serious look on her face. She handed me another letter, which she claimed was a warning about my unregistered dog. The letter stated that if I didn't comply within 7 days, I'd be fined and possibly removed from the neighborhood. It felt like a personal attack. I had been a model resident, following every rule. And yet, Karen was targeting me just because of my service dog. She was clearly using her power to intimidate me, but I wasn't about to let her. I needed to take action, but what was the best way to handle it? I knew I couldn't just ignore Karen's demands. Scout had been with me for years, and I wasn't about to let anyone take him away, especially not someone like Karen who clearly had a personal vendetta against us. The problem was she had the HOA's backing, and I needed to play my cards carefully. But I had one thing she didn't expect: knowledge. After a few sleepless nights of research, I gathered everything I needed to defend myself. I made sure I understood every rule and regulation regarding service dogs, and I pulled up the specific provisions under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, that protected my right to have a service dog, regardless of the HOA's stance on pets. Scout was legally protected, and Karen couldn't just make him disappear. I also did a little digging on Karen. As much as I hated to admit it, I knew that the best way to beat someone like her was by using their own secrets against them. Karen had always acted like she was above everyone else in the neighborhood. But I had a feeling she wasn't as perfect as she appeared. Over the next week, I kept a low profile while gathering information. I reached out to neighbors who had dealt with Karen's behavior before and started compiling a list of complaints about her and the HOA's practices. Some neighbors told me about how Karen had targeted families with children for minor violations or forced them to redo landscaping to her exacting standards. The more I learned, the more I realized that Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a bully who used her position for personal gain. One day, while I was at the local park with Scout, I saw Karen talking to a neighbor. They seemed to be discussing something serious, but when she noticed me, Karen immediately cut the conversation short and walked away quickly. It was clear she was nervous about something, and I had a feeling I knew what it was. That evening, as I sat in my living room, I received an unexpected email. It was a public record request that a neighbor had sent me, detailing some of Karen's questionable activities in the HOA. The email contained a file that outlined Karen's relationship with a local pet store, where she had been sending business and receiving kickbacks from them for recommending their services to residents who had pet-related issues. This was it. The evidence I needed to expose Karen's hypocrisy. Not only had she been targeting me for having a service dog, but she had been secretly profiting off of the very same pet policies she was using to harass others. The next morning, I decided it was time to confront Karen. This time, I wouldn't just defend my rights. I was going to take her down and make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else in the neighborhood. I walked up to her house, email in hand, ready to make the confrontation official. She was outside, watering her garden, when she saw me approaching. "Oh, it's you again," she said with a thin smile. "I thought we'd already discussed this." I didn't waste any time. "Karen, we need to talk," I said, holding out my phone. "I have some documents here that show you've been abusing your position to force people into buying pet services for your own personal gain." Her smile faltered for a split second before she quickly masked it with a scowl. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I showed her the email and the kickback scheme. Her face went pale, and for a brief moment, I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew I had her. But instead of backing down, she tried to act like she wasn't worried. "You think this is going to make a difference?" she sneered. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I'll make sure you're removed from this neighborhood." But I was done with her threats. "You can't threaten me anymore, Karen. Not after everything I've exposed. You've been abusing your power as HOA president for your own benefit, and it's time for the neighborhood to know what you've been doing." The confrontation with Karen wasn't just about my right to have Scout. It was about exposing her for the bully she truly was. I knew she wasn't going to just back down after I confronted her, but this time I was ready. Armed with proof of her corrupt actions, I knew the only way to put an end to her reign of terror was to bring the truth to light. I immediately emailed the HOA board members and included the evidence I had gathered about Karen's shady dealings. I didn't stop there. I also filed a formal complaint with the local authorities. The kickback scheme was illegal, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I also reached out to a local journalist who had previously written about corrupt HOA practices. After seeing the documents I provided, the journalist was eager to dig deeper and expose Karen's involvement in illegal activity. This was no longer just a personal issue. It had become a community-wide scandal. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I knew that it would be the perfect opportunity to finally confront Karen in front of the entire community. I wasn't just going to fight for my rights. I was going to make sure that no one else had to go through what I did. The night before the meeting, I received a text from a neighbor, Megan, who had been supporting me throughout this whole ordeal. She told me that Karen had been going around, warning people not to attend the HOA meeting and claiming that I was fabricating lies about her. Karen even spread rumors that I was trying to take over the HOA and that I was only using Scout as an excuse to manipulate the rules. It was clear that Karen was trying to cover her tracks and make herself look like the victim. But the more she tried to spin her lies, the more obvious it became that she had something to hide. I made sure to bring all of my evidence to the meeting the next day. The game was on. When I walked into the HOA meeting, it was like stepping into a battlefield. The room was full of neighbors, some who were nervously looking around, unsure of where they stood, while others were whispering about the scandal that was about to unfold. Karen was sitting at the front, her usual smug expression on her face, but I could see a flicker of nervousness behind her eyes. She knew something was coming. The board president called the meeting to order, and as the agenda went on, I knew it was time. I stood up and walked to the front, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on me. "I'd like to bring up an important issue," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This issue involves our HOA president, Karen. What I'm about to share with you is proof of illegal activity that Karen has been involved in for months." The room went silent as I laid out the evidence I had gathered, emails, records, and the kickback scheme. I showed them how Karen had been forcing residents to pay for unnecessary services while personally profiting from it. I even included the text from Karen threatening to remove me if I didn't comply with her rules about Scout. Karen stood up quickly, her face flushed with anger. "This is a complete lie," she shouted, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable, and the room began to murmur in shock. One by one, neighbors began to speak out. They shared their own experiences of how Karen had abused her position to get what she wanted, how she had made their lives miserable with petty fines and unfair demands. The board president looked at Karen, his face serious. "Karen, this is very serious. We cannot allow this behavior to continue." Karen's smug expression was gone. She was now visibly shaken, realizing that her corruption had been exposed. The board voted, and it was unanimous. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Not only had I fought for my right to keep my service dog, but I had also helped rid the neighborhood of a bully who had been abusing her position for too long. The neighborhood was no longer under her control, and it was time for a fresh start. The aftermath of Karen's removal was nothing short of transformative. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief, and many of the residents who had been too intimidated to speak up before began to feel more confident. People started attending the HOA meetings again, and there was a sense of community and collaboration that hadn't existed under Karen's rule. But even though she was no longer the HOA president, I knew that Karen wasn't someone who would go quietly into the night. She was vindictive and determined to get revenge on anyone who had been involved in her downfall, especially me. A few days after the meeting, I got a suspicious letter in the mail from Karen. It was an official legal notice claiming that I was in violation of some obscure HOA rule. The letter demanded that I either pay a hefty fine or face further action. It was clear she was trying to drag me into a legal battle, hoping that I'd either cave or give up out of frustration. But this time I wasn't scared. I knew exactly how to handle this. I took the letter to my lawyer, who quickly dismissed it as an empty threat. We sent a response, citing the law and the injustice of her previous actions. Karen was playing a dangerous game, and now she was on the receiving end of the law. The best part? Karen's plan backfired. Not only did the HOA back off, but they also publicly apologized for allowing her to abuse her power for so long. The residents were more involved than ever, and many began to question the previous board's decisions, making sure nothing like Karen's rule could happen again. As for Karen, she was left isolated. The other residents started avoiding her, and many people who had once feared her now came forward with their own stories of how she had bullied them or made their lives difficult. Karen's reputation was shattered, and she quickly became the neighborhood pariah. But the real victory wasn't just about getting Karen removed or proving her wrong. It was about regaining control over my life. I had fought back not just for my rights, but for everyone in the neighborhood who had been too scared to speak up. As for Scout, he was finally able to walk through the neighborhood without fear. We went on long walks every evening, and as I looked around at the peaceful streets, I couldn't help but smile. We had fought back against an abusive HOA, exposed a corrupt leader, and come out on top. And that's how I took down Karen and exposed her corruption once and for all. If you've ever had to fight back against a Karen or an overbearing HOA president, drop a comment below and let me know how you handled it. Like, subscribe, and comment for more crazy stories of standing up for your rights and taking control of your life.